So hello to everyone out there. My name is Angie Peacock. I'm a psychiatric drug withdrawal consultant and a healing coach. I enjoy bringing important conversations like the one we're going to have today with Bernie Silvernail of the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices. This is the first interview of a series of 5. So we're going to get like deep in the weeds. Today is just going to be an introduction to the Alliance, sort of where it came from, a little bit about bind. I know everybody's heard that term floating around, a little bit about research and advocacy about benzodiazepines and their withdrawal. So hello, Bernie, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Angie.
Me too. All right, so let me go ahead and read his bio. It's short and sweet and to the point, and then we will jump right into the conversation. Oh, and let me go down. Here we go. Okay, so Bernie Silvernail, MS, is the spouse of a benzodiazepine-induced neurological dysfunction sufferer and a former high-tech manager. Bernie is a founding member and president of the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices. Sorry, that's a mouthful. It's so big. So that's Bernie. All right, now can you just tell me a little bit, Bernie, like how did the Alliance for the Benzodiazepine Best Practices, how did it get started? Like what happened?
It started back in 2017. Well, actually, my journey started much earlier I was just tagging along with my wife's journey. Mm-hmm. She was prescribed benzodiazepines, 2 types, Valium and Xanax, and for pain, believe it or not. And she's a registered nurse, and she questioned the use of those drugs in the first place. But over time, she was prescribed more and more drugs to counteract the side effects of these things. So she was up to 4 drugs and finally said, no, that the drugs are causing the problem, and the problem is getting worse. So she took over 3 years to taper off and has been off of these drugs for almost 8 years. And she still has some symptoms. It's still improving slowly, but anyway, she was my inspiration for wanting to get involved in this. And Dr. Stephen Wright put together, along with Marjorie Merritt Carmen, who actually did the funding and was the originator of this. It was the international symposium, the International Benzodiazepines Symposium. It was held in 2017. It was like a 3-day conference with docs from all over the place, including a couple of people internationally came to this. So it was a great opportunity. It was in Bend. I live in Portland, Oregon, and so we were able to just make a 5-hour drive and attend this very important conference. At the conference, I went there with a mission. I wanted to form a coalition of people to work together to try to resolve this problem, not just talk about it. And I was able to contact the medical director of that conference, which is Dr. Stephen Wright. We got along well, and so we decided to put together the Alliance. It took us a few months to get it all set up and incorporated, and then a few more months to get it up and running with the website and that kind of thing. So from that humble beginning of the 2 of us, we contacted several other people who were at that conference, and it grew to the organization it is now. We're celebrating our 5th year anniversary right now, and we have grown to 11 person board of directors and I think it's about 25 advisors. Over 20 of the people that are advisors or directors are medical professionals, either pharmacists, MDs, or DOs. And we have a range of other professionals who are part of the organization, this formal part of it, the advisors and board. We also have a lot of other people who are members of our organization who are not on an advisory board, but we call on them for volunteer work. So, and we have plenty of things going on. So that's the structure.
Well, happy anniversary, 5 years. I remember watching the retape video. I think it was Catherine Pullman. Was that Catherine?
Yes, she was.
I remember watching her presentation, I think on YouTube or something back then. I was in deep withdrawal, laying on the couch watching YouTube to try to, stay alive for the most part. But yeah, that's really cool how it started. Can you share a little bit about bind? I know that came out of the conference, right? That term bind. Can you share, like, what is that?
Well, Bind took quite a while to evolve because there was even among all these medical professionals who were at that conference, and I think there were, they had breakout conferences and everything. There must have been 25 or so medical professionals who were presenting there, and then a bunch that were attending. So maybe 50 or so were there. Very few patients, interestingly enough. There was a panel, a 5-person panel, and Carrie, my wife, and one other person. That was it for the people who were patients, because it just wasn't that well advertised. Mm-hmm. But at that conference, it was interesting because there was a lot of confusion about what was going on with benzodiazepines. Why are these patients in this panel telling us about their horrible experiences? And it was, I talked to at least a half a dozen MDs and a couple of neurophysicists at that point. Mm-hmm. And none of them understood what was going on. They were surprised that there was this thing in the background they had never heard of. Some of them had various names for it: protracted withdrawal, or mm-hmm. post-acute withdrawal syndrome, pause. A lot of them just called it ongoing dependence or ongoing withdrawal. So there were a lot of names for it. And Dr. Wright and I talked about how to try to make some sense out of this. And it took us a long time to converge on it. But last year, we convened a formal group to try to give it one name instead of the 15 that we had discovered in the literature. We did extensive literature searches on this. Mm-hmm. And so we convened a group of medical experts, about half of which were from the Alliance, and the other half were from like Vanderbilt and Stanford and University of Colorado, other institutions. Mm-hmm. And we went through a process, a Delphi process, to try to come up with a name that everybody agreed to, that acknowledged the symptoms and its origin, and tried to explain what it was. And so we went through, oh gosh, I think it was 9 rounds of this Delphi process, where we had, I think it was 17 or 18 different candidate names and variations of them. So we would propose them, discuss them, and send a lot of emails back, summarize, have meetings, and then vote. We did that cycle twice a week for quite a while until we narrowed it down to this one term that everybody felt captured it. So since we're talking about Bind, can I just take a second to tell you the current status of this?
Yes, please go for it.
Okay. So the only place this is actually defined is on our website, the Alliance's website, benzoreform.org. And so there's a page dedicated to it. And all the members of the Benzodiazepine Action Work Group from the Colorado Consortium for Prescription Drug Abuse Prevention. It is one of these organizations that was set up to try to deal with this problem. And they've been in business for several years. But anyway, all of the members there have been asked to link to this. And so we're using this one page of our website as the repository for what is Bind. Well, that's about to change pretty soon. We are in the second round of peer review on a formal paper that will formal medical paper that will get published on this. And this paper is co-authored by a couple of docs from Vanderbilt University, our medical director, Christy Huff, from the University of Colorado. Excuse me, not Christy Huff. Alexis Ridvo. Yeah. So had the two going.
I was like, wait, what happened?
Yeah. Alexis Ridvo. And then Christy Huff from the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, and Dee Foster from Easing Anxiety. Mm-hmm. So we're all co-authors on this paper. We're pretty excited about it because it incorporates the Delphi process for the naming, which I just talked about. Mm-hmm. And it also incorporates the results of a survey that was done by Dr. Jane McCoubrey and Christy Huff a couple of years ago on benzodiazepines, which has over 1,200 respondents. And anyway, it provides a good statistical background for the likelihood of developing Bind. And so anyway, it defines this and provides numbers behind it and calls and has a professional call for action. So we expect this to get published within the next couple of months. That's typically what it has taken for the other papers that we've published from when we're at the second round of review point to where it actually gets published. It'll be available online for anybody to access, and we will certainly post its connections to it on our website, as will all the other groups that I just mentioned.
Awesome. That sounds really good. Just to, even I do literature searches sometimes. I have a Google alert for benzos and I'll get it. And it's like, nothing's there, nothing's there, nothing's there. I see it every day. It come through my inbox, deprescribing. It's like, where's deprescribing? What's going on? So it's really cool that you guys are adding to the literature. I have a question about, can you take us back a little bit? For people in the audience that could be caregivers, supporters, people that are not injured by a benzo, maybe prescribers or therapists, what is the problem with benzodiazepines?
Oh, goodness. Well, there are several problems. The probably the biggest one, and that's a part of bind, is that they become variously called in the literature addictive, or you develop physiological dependence on them. Addiction is the common term that's preferred by medical care providers and by the government agencies who fund research. So they use that term quite freely. However, the more accurate term is physiological dependence, which means that if you don't continue to use the drug, you suffer a form of withdrawal. You develop tolerance and have to go through withdrawal. And the withdrawal can be very mild, as in some people can actually, from a small dose, can just drop the drug and not have any effects. Other people, if they're on a sufficiently big enough dose or have been on long enough, if they stop taking the drug, it can kill them. So there's this huge spectrum of possibilities for outcome. Just a number to stick in your head. For people who have been using benzodiazepines for more than 4 weeks, there's a 20% chance you're going to suffer a long-term damage from it. This is bind. 20% chance of developing bind if you use it for over 4 weeks. And there's various other types of problems that you can go through. Most of it's centered around withdrawal. There's, of course, a lot of side effects associated with the use of benzodiazepines, as they call them. They're effects of the drug. So the one that we focus on in the Alliance, and that is the source of, or the motivation for most of our research work, is bind. And we've published 10 papers on this so far. We have 3 more that are in process, including the one I just mentioned. And we have a book that we published that's the best in class book on benzodiazepine, written by 12 MDs. Only one of which was is actually an Alliance member. All the rest were other MDs that we put a coalition together to develop this book. It's called The Benzodiazepines Crisis. So that's our research side. We do a lot of that kind of thing, because that's how you motivate change in the medical community. It has to be based on literature. And just lots of stories of people suffering, like what Angie has experienced, and what the people that contact her have experienced, or what people see through Benzo Buddies or any of these other organizations. That isn't enough. They want to see these research papers, and that's the gold standard for them. If it makes it through peer review, then they're more likely to look at it. So that's why we focused at that level.
That's a really good point. Because I have clients all the time that say, when are they going to fix this? When are they going to fix it? And I said to one yesterday, actually, I said, if each one of us were able to help in one way, perhaps it might change and we could prevent the next generation. But it was like, I'm not convinced that would do it. I'm just not convinced. It needs to change at the academic level and the training of physicians for them to even pay attention. Us as patients, we're already discounted because we have anxiety. So they think, oh, it's just anxiety that I see, so it's tricky. So thank you for adding to that literature. That's amazing. Really quick, specifically, when you say bind, can you spell out, like, what are the symptoms of that? or what are we looking at when we say withdrawal? Just for people that don't know.
Okay. Well, they're highly variable and they come and go. That's part of it. There's this windows and waves phenomena where they either exacerbate or diminish. It's one of the most difficult diseases to characterize because there've been over 140 symptoms associated with withdrawal and bind, because you think of bind as a continuation of what you go through, and withdrawal sometimes worse and sometimes not as bad as the withdrawal process. So the most common ones are usually an exacerbation of the indication that the drug was prescribed for originally. So if you presented originally with anxiety and that's why your care provider prescribed them, the chances are pretty good that during the withdrawal process and possibly during the continuing bind process, you will experience elevated anxiety. It tapers off after a time, after your neural system adapts, but that is highly variable. Like I said, it can be 0 days to years. So it really depends on the individual. The other classic reasons for prescribing benzodiazepines also show up too. Insomnia. You can have an increase in insomnia. I'm not the medical expert here, so I would leave the full list of symptoms to someone like Alexa. You're going to do an interview.
Yeah, we'll interview her. We'll ask her that question for sure.
Yeah, she's the best authority on this. Some of the symptoms are really weird. I'll just have to say one that is extremely common is what is a little bit hard to explain. It's called net neural load.
Ooh.
So you think of things that are normally pleasurable in your life, like the wind blowing on your face and the sunshine and the brightly colored leaves in the fall, sounds and smells. With this phenomenon called net neural load, those add up and they actually become disturbing somehow, either painful or where it turns into you have balance problems associated with it. So that's only the only real common threads we've been able to from a layman's viewpoint, point out here. One is net neural load. So if the more stimulus you get, the more likely you are to get these other increased symptoms. And so it's that and the windows and waves phenomena where they come and go. Mm-hmm. Those are the big distinguishing characteristics. Now, they happen to also distinguish several other types of diseases, such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, some versions of MS, and I could go on. There's several other look-alike things here, so it's not easy for your prescriber, for your clinician to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, patients are kind of left. They can't just walk into the office and say, "Doc, fix me." You have to help your doctor understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they may not know about benzodiazepine problems, so you just spend some time educating them.
Well, and maybe it's not in the differential diagnosis, like, is this patient taking a benzo? Could this be from the drug? I don't think that's a part of their training as of yet,
Well, there is some good news on that part. Yeah, we have a few of our members, our directors and advisors, who are educators as well as clinicians. Mm-hmm. And so they're at various universities. And the one theme that they have all been telling me is that the education system has gotten much more savvy, at least from the ones that they're affiliated with, about benzodiazepines. And that I found that very encouraging, because we had one of our programs that we had running was trying to find a way to get the medical exams that all docs are required to complete before they finish their training, to get those exams to have more questions about benzodiazepines in them. So we had a whole program launched for that. It's an influence campaign that takes a lot of time and effort. And but the feedback from these docs is that the newly minted interns are coming out with a much better understanding of the perils of overprescribing benzodiazepines. In fact, two of them told me that they're concerned that they're not using enough benzodiazepines because there is an appropriate use of benzos. But from what I've read in the literature, and particularly from Heather Ashton's work and her son, John Ashton, talking with him, they had swung to the point where they were not advocating the use of benzos beyond 2 weeks. And most of the literature, we spent a lot of effort trying to get the focus down to 2 to 4 weeks, because there was a lot of literature that said 4 months, or the long term is completely safe and all that kind of thing. So we've gotten it narrowed down to the 2 to 4 week realm. But so anyway, the medical education seems to be better now. So the newly minted doctors and pharmacists are much more aware of the problem. The difficulty lies with the folks who are trained previously and really have no motivation to retrain. They know these drugs. They've been prescribing them for years. They work. And unfortunately, for the long-term injury sufferers, they do work initially. It's knowing when to stop using them or not to increase the dose when the patient doesn't respond properly. That's a common problem. Right. They prescribe in a certain amount, and the anxiety doesn't disappear. So the doc says, prescribe more. I mean, that's what they're trained to do. Years ago, that's what they were trained to do. So we don't blame them. It's just a lack of current understanding. And the FDA has helped out here. And send out plaudits to them, because in 2020, they came out with a boxed warning against the long-term use of benzodiazepines. Unfortunately, that message doesn't seem to be getting to the more entrenched doctors. So I'll just, if you've got a minute, I'll just tell
please,
you an example.
Please.
When Dr. Wright was with us for 4 years, and when he decided to retire from medicine, we did a search to find a new medical director for the Alliance. And when we did that, and by the way, we hired Alexis Ritvo as a result of that process. But when we were doing that, I personally interviewed 23 addiction specialists who were candidates for this position. Other than Alexis, only one other doc knew about that box warning.
Wow.
And this was a year and a half after it had been published by the FDA. These are people who make their living in that domain, and they weren't even aware of it. So, and we've contacted the FDA about this. I met with a couple of the directors at the FDA, and they say, well, that's really unfortunate, but yeah, they move on to new things. They don't have an answer for it.
A fun story about that boxed label is, back then, there was a bunch of us from Benzo Info Coalition. We were trying to get patients to submit testimony. And literally, guys in the audience, we were laying in our beds, sick as dogs, filing these Medwatch reports. And the FDA took those. And actually, at the time, I asked Bob Whitaker from Mad in America, I was like, is this really going to work? Is this going to help? And he said, it doesn't matter. Keep doing it, because it does add to the database. Like, there will be data there someday. He's like, the FDA isn't very good at reading the data, but it's there. So we kept going. And then they actually did take into account all those reports that we had filed, like one by one. Patients, like, we would just find them in the Facebook groups and say, hey, can we file a Medwatch report for you, or can you do it yourself? And if they were scared, we'd help them through that. So I think that was one idea, one way that we did advocacy, even when you're sick, to try to help the problem.
Yeah, that was before the Alliance got formed. We were on the tail end of that campaign to file, and we still have a thing up on our website saying, please, if you've been affected, file your make a what do you call it, an error report, problem report through Medwatch. So we still have a hot link, and we ask people to do it. But you're absolutely right. There were over 500 personal stories that they referenced in the the white paper that backed up this change from the FDA. This is like a 100-page white paper they drafted with, I don't know, 140 references or something like that. We have a copy that we read through that and analyzed it, and we were pleased to see that those personal stories that you guys were inspired to write, that did make a difference. So keep it up, because they still watch this. We know they still pay attention to this. There've been over in the last, I guess, trying to think of the time period, but I know there's been over 300,000 complaints against benzodiazepines.
Wow.
Until 2018, they were the most complained against drug class. In 2018, the opioids overtook them, but it wasn't until then that they became more complained about than benzo. Benzo is still number 2. Yeah. So
fascinating.
Yeah.
But and then one thing I learned about the FDA when they issued that black box warning, the problem is FDA is a regulatory agency, but it's not, what's the word, enforcement. So they can't.
That's DEA.
Yeah. So I asked, like, well, if this came out, why is that not translating to clinical practice? And it's because it's up to the provider to read it or to know about it. There's no like, they don't send an email from the FDA to every doctor on the planet and say, hey, by the way, we just changed the black box warning. So it doesn't translate like that, which I think is kind of wrong somehow. Like, how does it drizzle down? Like, when you make a regulatory change at the FDA level, why is that not getting to clinical practice?
Well, I can't state the specifics of why that would be the case. I do know that the FDA posts, whenever they make a change like this, they do post that on their official website for it. Oh, by the way, a word about that, and we have a warning on our front page about this. If you just do a search for the FDA information on any benzo, the first page that you get on Google will give you the wrong results.
Wow.
Because it'll give you the FDA results. They're always number 1 to number 3 in the results. Like, for example, if you look up Valium label or Valium prescribing information, those are the 2 terms they use, label and prescribing information. And if you look those up, within the first 3 items, you'll see the FDA official information. You read it, it's out of date. It doesn't contain, in most cases, it doesn't contain this, the box warnings, neither this one nor the one they just issued last year about use of benzodiazepines during pregnancy, because your child winds up being dependent when they're born and they have to go through withdrawal.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. So these have been issued, but we've been trying to work with the FDA to get them to change how the prescribers connect with this information, because they connect with the wrong thing if they just do a Google search. Unless they go to a specific site that the FDA uses for the latest information, which is, it's in the search results, but it's like page 2, hit number 27 or something. And docs are just humans, so they're going to go to the first FDA they see, and that's part of the reason that there isn't change, because they get this. We're drafting a little letter to Google now to try to ask them to help us to get this change, because it really is the search engines. Then if we're successful there, we'll go to Bing and the other ones and ask them to change also.
So two thoughts I just had while you were sharing that is, one, are these FDA changes going to translate to academic training for the new docs coming out? I don't know if you know the answer to that. But then the second question is, this is always my concern. Anytime there's a legislative change or advocacy or something in the media, anything, is that docs will have a backlash, like, benzos are bad, cut everybody off. And that's opposite of what we want. We don't want anybody to be cut off of a benzo. We're asking for safer prescribing and safer deprescribing if the patient wants that, not like a mandatory, you have to get off because they're bad, So can you say anything about what I was thinking?
Yeah, so we share that concern. We've talked to a lot of patients that have that concern, and it's a very real concern. It's a matter of how much an individual doc how much energy they'll put into understanding what the problem is and how to deal with it. The best practices call for a patient-led taper assisted by your physician, and So everywhere that we have any chance to influence this, that's what we call for. We've seen in the opioid crisis that indeed has been the reaction of some of the doctors. It's difficult to manage patients with this kind of physiological dependence or addiction. And so some docs just say, I'm not going to deal with those drugs anymore. I'm stopping my opioid practice completely. I will not prescribe those. And we've seen some prescribers do that for benzodiazepines too. Once they become aware of the problem, they say, I don't want that problem, so I'll just stop. And what happens as a result of that, of course, is the patients they've been treating and giving them regular benzos for years now have to go out and doctor shop, find somebody who will prescribe them because they're dependent on these things. It's not just a matter of changing their behavior. It's a matter of allowing their physiology to adapt to a new decreased dose of these things over time.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's going to be the case. There will be some that will do that.
Yeah, and I hope I don't scare anybody by saying this, but I have a lot of older clients that are in their 50s or 60s, and they're like, I'm not really sure if I want to taper, or I want to, but I'm scared, or I need to find a doctor, things like this. And then I always think, and I usually tell them this, it's a matter of time before either you send up a red flag because benzos are on the Beers list, which is a list of drugs that older patients shouldn't be taking. Either your state is going to change regulatory things, your insurance company might not cover that certain doctor, your doctor dies or retires, the hospital stops. I've seen it so many times over the years where the well-meaning patient who's doing well on a benzo, who is feeling okay, they're not sick, they're not having a ton of side effects, but they're on it long term. I worry for them that it's a matter of time before either this is going to finally break open that benzos are that bad and shouldn't be prescribed long term, and then people cut, I don't know. So what do you think about that? I know it's kind of scary subject.
Well, first of all, what we're focused on in the Alliance is trying to prevent the initial long-term prescription. So that's where a lot of our energy goes. In terms of patients who are on these things long-term, most of our docs encourage people to try to find a lower dose. Move to a lower dose if you can. And if you can tolerate that, try another lower dose. The goal is to eventually get people off. It's not to cut them off, certainly, but it's eventually to remove the dependence. And unfortunately, these drugs seem to do some sort of neurological damage, which we funded a big study at the University of Arizona. We spent a lot of money on this thing, and to try to understand the root cause of this. And it was an animal study, and we published 3 papers on this. And they still were not able to understand the neurophysiological problem that is induced by longer term use. What does it actually damage? There's several theories about this, a couple of real popular ones that several people have ascribed to, several papers. But the bottom line is the healing takes a long time, and we just have to allow people to have that time. There's a couple of docs in our organization who have not been able to find a way to get people off completely. They taper them down, and depending on the situation, it's a balance. So trying to find a place where there is minimum symptoms and maximum life engagement, minimum life impacts, and then they will just maintain people at that lower dose. But almost universally, it's a significant drop in the dosage that they were presented with originally. A lot of these are what they call legacy patients. So another doc prescribed and kept ratcheting up the amount. Maybe they're on 2 or 3 of these things. And then the benzo aware doc gets them and does a review, and then slowly tapers them off, usually to 1 medication, and usually at a much lower level. Some people wind up just staying there for a really long time, and if they feel they're capable of knocking some more off, they do it. So it's one of these hyperbolic curves. It's not just a chop. That's been the standard in the medical practices. There's just a cut, but now it's more of this taper that goes off slower and slower over time.
That's it. Yes. Thank you for talking about that. So let's go back to the Alliance. I know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but can you tell us the focus of the Alliance? So like research, education, advocacy, like I know you talked about some papers, some research. So like what does the Benzo Alliance do the best like at? What do you guys have on the horizon?
Okay, well, we have the best in class website for medical professionals, certainly. We have a lot of information up there for patients and for those who can digest it. All of the things that we provide for medical professionals to help them do better practice is also available. So if you want to understand the problem and its solutions in depth, we have a really good website for that. I already mentioned the research thing and our research papers. We just did another one a couple of days ago. We've done 52 continuing medical education programs to medical professionals, usually doctors and pharmacists. We've reached, I think it's about 4,000 MDs now through this training. And so they get medical professionals, at least docs, have to have this kind of training on a periodic basis. So not necessarily on benzos, but they have to have some form of medical training. And so they get these credits that go towards their mandatory requirement. And at the same time, they receive formal training on benzodiazepines from our organization. So all of our presentations are 100% evidence-based. We have tons of references for the entire presentation. Most statements have a one-to-one correlation with a reference we can cite for, we cite a number or a recommendation. There is at least one and sometimes as many as a dozen papers that back that up. So that's what we pride ourselves on, is being 100% evidence-based. Mm-hmm. So that's on the education, trying to influence the prescriber's side of business, mm-hmm. Directly through education and through the papers in the book. The other thing that we have underway is we're working with a couple of different legislatures, state legislatures, to try to introduce or to improve existing introduced legislation that will provide the right guidance for prescribers relative to benzo prescription. That usually means no long-term prescription without a series of more difficult reviews. So we've been part of the Colorado legislation, which we view as the model legislation for this. It's actually not only the legislation has been in place for over a year, but their actual integration with the medical practice within the state has been in place for that amount of time. And they actually have systematically enforced restrictions on benzodiazepine prescription. Initial prescription, especially for anything over 14 days, they have to go through a much more difficult process. Nice. So we're working with a legislator in New Jersey, working with Jody Burns in Massachusetts to try to improve the legislation that's been proposed there for the fourth time. Yep. Trying to find a way to improve that so it'll increase the chances of it being acceptable by the Massachusetts legislature. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple other states we're in earlier discussion with to try to see if we can forward a model legislation through, try to find an advocate in other states. So if any of the people seeing this are connected with any legislators or know how to connect with them, and you think there may be an openness to model legislation for benzodiazepine to restrictions to reduce the unnecessary initiation of benzodiazepines. Not only unnecessary, but harmful. Mm-hmm. Please contact me. Yeah, that would be great. We'd love to have more connections there. We're also working with some state medical associations, and we know we're connected with the alphabet soup of government organizations, federal. Primarily FDA. We have a pretty good working relationship with them. We have have our second safe use initiative proposal into them. This is a joint project with Kaiser Permanente, and if they accept that, we'll have a multi-year program that's under the aegis of the FDA, but Kaiser Permanente will be leading it, and we're an agent with them. We originated it, and Kaiser is now our partner on it. So too early to say anything about the success of that yet, because there's a two-stage process and we're still in the first stage. We are working with prescription benefit management companies, PBMs. These are the folks that decide. They work with pharmacies. I'm not very good at explaining this, but they work with pharmacies, big and typically big pharmaceutical chains. They have their own PBMs, and what they do is they decide how to dole out the various drugs, what they'll pay for, how many doses in a given amount of time. We've found one particular PBM, it's a little too early to talk about them, who is willing to work with us on a research project there to demonstrate the positive effects of properly managing benzodiazepine prescription at the initiation level. So they call them benzo-naive patients, so it's first prescription folks.
Right.
So we're doing a lot of these. There's a few others, but we're doing a lot of these types of things where we're trying to not just publicize the message of the problems associated with benzos, but trying to actually influence the prescriptive practices. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's the idea there.
Honestly, Bernie, it gives me a lot of hope. You're giving me hope that things will change. You know, like I didn't even know all this was going on in the background. I'm happy to hear it. Like it helps me because I work with people affected by this, and I see their suffering every single day. And it's like, why is this still happening? Like you feel so helpless, So this really, this helps. Yeah.
Well, what we've learned is, and there are several papers backing this up, is that educating prescribers alone will generally not change their behavior. You get about a 20%, I don't know what you call it, a 20% change based on fully explaining the problem and educating, even these CMEs I was talking about. We expect that at a maximum, 20% of prescribers will change their behavior based on that. The other 80% has to come from systematic changes, just call it that. And those are beyond just the FDA saying, you should change your practice, because that's more of an educational viewpoint. It is through changing the prescription management systems that they use. Almost all medical professionals now use electronic health records. And these enforce certain types of behavior. And so that's why we're working with the EHR companies to try to get their recommendations and what they will authorize to be more conformant with what the evidence shows, rather than what they were taught 20 years ago in medical school, what the evidence shows. So that's why we emphasize that so much, because we think that's where the change will come from. Now, so far, I've only talked about what we're doing to try to prevent this problem. We also have a couple of efforts going on the side of what about the people who are stuck in the problem. So should I talk about that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that for the end, but I mean, yeah, go ahead. Let's just flow right into it. Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right. So first of all, on our website, we have, and we've had this for quite a while, we have a whole bunch of guide documents that are meant to help affected patients understand the problem, but most importantly, you can print these things out and take them with you to your doctor, and you can use it to explain something that you may not be an expert in to a doctor who thinks they're an expert in it, but has 20-year-old information. So that's what these things are targeted for. There's a guide for helping you. How do you address your docs so you don't alienate them, because it's a tough topic if you're approaching them with new information. And then also what all of the facts behind it with all the references. And so there's layers of this. At the bottom end of it, there's also a tapering guide, which is, I guess it's about 7 or 8 pages that has the do's and don'ts associated with tapering. And this is written from a very cautious standpoint. So it has various warnings throughout it to help people avoid any of the common pitfalls associated with tapering. So that's what it's targeted at. It's not targeted at getting you off the drugs quickly. It's more targeted at doing it very safely. Okay, and it's got a disclaimer that says this is not medical advice, it's just our best knowledge. So that's a lot of people access that, and some people have found that to be very helpful. So so we offer that. We don't do at the Alliance, we don't do any kind of individual counseling or anything like that. Angela is much better at that. There are a couple of other people that we can refer you to, but a lot of that, frankly, is on the website. If you just look for BenzoWise doctors, for example, you'll find something there. And if you you be very liberal in using search on the website, you'll find a lot of stuff there. Another thing that we're doing is the FDA contacted us, oh gosh, now it's over a year ago, to be part of, to submit a bid for deprescription protocols, to develop formal deprescription protocols for the medical community. So we were among several other groups that were approached. ASAM was one of those. That's the American Society for Addiction Medicine. They were part of it. There's a research group out of RTP in North Carolina. It has over 5,000 docs specializing in this type of thing. We're just a little nonprofit, but we were on their list. And so we met with the FDA a couple of times about this. And all of the organizations, including this big organization, initially said they wouldn't do this because it was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar project, but it was too big for us and it didn't meet the needs. I'm guessing it was not enough money or not enough time for the other organizations. So everybody kind of walked away from it. And that left the FDA with a bunch of money and nowhere to go. And so they contacted, or somehow they found a way to work with ASAM. So ASAM is now leading an effort with FDA backing to develop a benzodiazepine deprescription protocol, an official one that will have backing of basically an alphabet soup of medical professional organizations. I think there's 7 of them that are working with ASAM. We're also working with them in an advisory capacity. One of our advisors is part of the team, and they've contacted us for some of the patient experiences that we've had also that we're able to connect them with. So we're in a more of a review capacity there than a drivership thing, but I thought it was significant that the FDA contacted us in the first place. So
yeah, look how far you've come from the Oregon conference to now. That's amazing. Amazing. Yeah. All right, so we have a couple questions from the audience. I'm not sure if you can answer them, but how about this? One person's asking, on the website, is there information helpful to non-prescribing practitioners? Is there anything there for like therapists or naturopaths or any other helping profession?
Well, yeah, I would say yes. We have it split into prescribers and patients, and then a bunch of resources and other things like that. And so I would encourage anybody who's looking not to just stick to the patient side. If you're a patient, you're an affected individual, because there's good information in the other areas. So, and sometimes you have to kind of cross. That's why I'm suggesting using the search function is probably the best way. We have But one of the most often asked questions is, what can I do for symptomatic relief? So we have a variety of different things that are in that area, including nutritional things, various types of relaxation therapy. There are a lot of herbs that can provide some sort of relief. There's another book we referenced there, written by one of our colleagues that helped us put this whole thing, Dr. Rafa and Bob Rafa, and it's called endogenous benzodiazepines. So it's the things that you eat that affect this system, because it's there not because of the drugs. It's always been there, and so what you eat actually influences how it works. So you can read through that. It's targeted more for medical professionals, but it has a lot about the different types of foods that we eat and how it affects things. So I would say, yes, there are things that are there, but it's not written specifically for any one group other than patients versus prescribers. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I guess I should mention this. I just wrote a letter yesterday to therapists and other helping professions. So we're going to put it below in the comments if you need like a letter for a therapist. I just wrote that yesterday, actually, last night. And I think it's pretty good. It kind of just gives a quick overview, but that's separate from your website, which is benzoreform.org, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
there's so much stuff. I just searched food and was like, ooh, I'm going to read all this later. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. Okay,
well, it's a lot. It's too much for some people, but
it's okay. It's
try
good.
to be complete. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much, just keep it coming. It's excellent. So I guess we're coming to the end. I want to ask, I guess, two more questions. So one is, I know that you're a caregiver of someone who's been through bind. So we have a lot of caregivers in the audience. We just did an interview with Travis, who was a caregiver a couple weeks ago, and that interview was very well received and it helped a lot of families. So can you just share like your own personal side, like what can help if you're a caregiver?
Just being compassionate, I think, is the main thing. The symptoms change so much, and some of them just don't make any sense from the outside. And fortunately, my wife Carrie is very articulate, so she'll explain what is going on. I'll often ask her, give me your top 5 symptoms for right now, and they vary a lot throughout the day, and both in terms of severity and whether they're even present or not. So I would say that's the number one thing, is don't give up and be compassionate. You just have to, and don't take it personal. I guess would be another thing, because if you're the one you're taking care of seems irrational or cranky or really depressed, if you just take a little step back and say it's the injury caused by these drugs. Think about it as the injury, not the person. And that reframes it enough that always gives me a breath of fresh energy when I do that.
I love that. That's excellent. That's excellent. Okay. So the last question, I guess, but it's always that I like to end on a little hope. So what hope can you give? You've already given me a ton, honestly, but like your closing thoughts about hope for legislation, hope for research, hope for the problem, hope for healing, like anything on the hope side. What can you share?
Well, the first thing is, on the personal side, you will get through this, and things will get better. But it may take a long time, but you just have to stick with it. And on a personal basis, you will get better as an affected individual, or as the person providing that care. Things will get better overall. Your life may not go back to normal, because this is one heck of an experience. I know it's affected us permanently. So that's on the personal side. On the professional side, people are listening to this now. The FDA has engaged on this after, they denied a previous petition that was written way back in 2008. And it was pretty much rejected out of hand. And here they came back in 2020 with, we discovered this thing. Yeah. And they did very thorough research to come back with that. But they moved in the right direction, is my point. And they continue to move in that direction. And there's interest in it. And there's sympathetic directors at the FDA who have recognized the problem. They tend to concentrate more on the let's remove the suffering of current patients side, rather than let's stop the input to the whole problem. There's a little less focus on that, other than the warnings, the boxed warnings from the FDA. But they're getting there. They're moving. All these wheels move slowly, especially when it's deeply entrenched medicine. It's been around for 60 years. So we're not going to change the world overnight. So don't give up.
Excellent.
Where you can join.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you're going to ask me about that?
No, that's my last question, but yes, go ahead. You say it.
Oh,
say it.
Yeah. Well, join one of these organizations. Certainly, we'd love to have you at the Alliance. There's Benzo Buddies, for those of you who haven't signed up. It's a great support group. Like all the other pluses and minuses, the Benzo Information Coalition is a very active group. They've done a lot to publicize the problems associated with this. Easing anxiety with Dee Foster is a good group. You can actually join the Colorado Consortium Benzodiazepine Action Work Group. You can just tune in and find out what the researchers are working on there. We have people that join there and actually have stayed, and others just pop in, find out what's going on, and move on. So yeah, get active. I think that's part of it, is you can go to any level you want, all the way from becoming an active member, or just supporting with your best wishes, or sending money to help all these places are nonprofits, and so they all depend on you for their longevity.
Yep. So last question, because I just thought of this while you were talking. When we say the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices and all the legislative and research efforts that you're putting forth, do any of those relate to the Z drugs or gabapentinoids, or are you only focusing on just benzos?
We focus on, even though we always talk about benzos, we focus on benzodiazepine receptor agonists. Okay, and that includes the Z drugs. Okay. It may include the gabapentinoids. I'm not sure, but I know it's definitely that we always mention the Z drugs when we do these continuing medical education things. We say, yes, these are the problems. The benzos are the biggest ones, but you can't simply switch your patients over to short-acting benzos, which is effectively what the Z drugs are. Right. They both work on the same receptor site. One's short-term, one's long-term. They just don't have the benzo structure associated. So the benzene ring, but they have the similar effects. So yes, we try to emphasize both, but our main focus is on benzodiazepines.
So people in the audience that don't know what that is, that's Xanax, clonazepam, Klonopin, whatever names, Valium, lorazepam, Ativan, these are all names. Diazepam. So if it ends in a Pam, it's probably a benzo.
That's a good rule. Yeah.
Yeah. For the Z drug side, that would be Lunesta, Sonata, and Ambien, correct? And then the gabapentinoid side would be Lyrica, gabapentin. I think that's it. So all those kind of hit the same receptor in the body, and they all kind of can cause this bind situation that we're all talking about. So
yeah, for some reason they all damage the neural system. We don't know why, but they actually cause damage, and that's why it's not just a simple matter of stopping the drug and you feel better. Your neural system has to fix itself.
Right, and alcohol. I would be remiss without mentioning that alcohol can sometimes, or does touch that system also, which is why some experience worsening symptoms from alcohol use after. Okay, well, thank you so much. Oh my God, I learned so much from you today. I feel like I just got CE credit from everything you said, even though I don't need it because I don't have a license necessarily that I can keep up. But thank you for sharing everything. Thank you for all the work you do. I'm so proud of you guys. I just love it. I love advocacy. I love research. Like, I'm a nerd for that kind of stuff. So I like enjoy this, and I can't wait to jump further into your website later and talk to the next 4 people. We have your medical director, Alexis Ritvo, who's awesome. She works at Colorado Consortium. We have Andorra. She's your advocacy expert. We have Doran, who is a person with lived experience. Who else? The pharmacist, Jolene Brezzi. Is it Brezzi?
Brezzi, yeah.
Brezzi. So we have all these. We're going to ask them all specific questions. So if you have any questions that you might want to know, please send them to me or post them below in the comments or post them below this video on YouTube later. We're happy to answer as many as we can, not specific, obviously, but in the realm of benzo, Z drugs, gabapentinoids, research, advocacy, blah, 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 anything you can think of. What are your closing thoughts, Bernie? Anything? Believe it's the
I
audience.
just wanted to mention Doreen also does our policy stuff. So she's lived experience and does policy and advocacy.
Awesome.
But particularly with government stuff. She's really good at that.
Awesome.
Many years experience. My closing thoughts is just to rephrase, you will get through this if you're suffering it, and don't give up.
Don't give up. And everybody can find you where? Where can they find you again? Last chance.
At benzoreform.org. You just go either through info@benzoreform.org, or if you want to send me an email directly, it's bernie@benzoreform.org.
Awesome. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you for all the work you guys do at the Alliance. Thank you for tuning in today. Please share this with your friends and family. There's so much good info here. And thank you for attending. And we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.